Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live chat, leveraging your community to grow online. Lessons and insights from Airbnb, a joint initiative by IndianRetailer.com and Alavi.ai. At Indian Retailer, we have been helping the retail, e-commerce, D2C, and consumer products community to adopt digital practices and go omni-channel by providing up-to-date news, in-depth analysis, research, best practices, and a lot more. We also keep track of changing consumer behavior and overall economic conditions in order to help brands assess their impact on their undertakings. You can also catch up with our work by subscribing to our newsletter or on indianretailer.com and by following our social media channels across Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I would also like to introduce Alavi.ai, a data science and AI powered marketing analytics application for B2C and D2C e-commerce brands. Alavi helps marketing teams acquire new audiences and optimize their marketing campaigns quickly and easily. You do not need to have years of digital marketing experience to use Alavi.ai. Anyone can use Alavi.ai and win customers for their life. Today, we are having a discussion with the global perspective and learnings from Airbnb that every e-commerce business can learn from. Hope that piqued your interest higher. Our talk will revolve around four areas today: how Airbnb ensures their community remains live and interactive, marketing strategies which are good for long-term business, what are some of the best practices for building powerful online communities, technology that can improve online performance. So joining us today, we have James McClure, who is an experienced C-level tech executive with experience spanning multiple industries in the digital marketplace space. Most recently, he was Chief Commercial Officer of Adzuna, a global job search engine, running their business across 16 global markets. Prior to that, he ran the enterprise business for SeatGeek, a ticketing marketplace, working with major sporting franchises like Manchester City, Liverpool, and Dallas Cowboys. James spent 8 years at Google in London, Sydney, and Singapore, most recently running their APAC Emerging Business Markets. Thank you for joining us, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to you, James.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you all.
After James' talk, we'll have Q&A session. If you have any questions during the course of discussion, you can share them in the Q&A or chat section at the bottom of the screen. We will take the questions post the discussion. Thank you, James, for joining us today. So which part of the world are you joining us from?
I'm based in slightly gloomy London, cold and gloomy London.
So it must be morning there right now.
Yeah, that's right, 10:30.
Oh, wonderful. So you must be very fresh. I mean, it's early in the morning, so the freshness must be there.
Well, I have a 4-month-old son, so the day started much earlier than 10:30 a.m. So fresh might be pushing it, but I'm doing okay, thank you.
Thank you once again for joining us, James. So it's now over to you.
Excellent. So let me share my screen so I can share the what I've been talking about for starting with Airbnb. Pretty sure everyone can see it. Charu, shout if you can't, otherwise I'll get started.
Yeah.
So, well, firstly, thanks everyone for taking the time to come talk, come listen to this. I think, as Charu mentioned, I've worked in a few different areas over my career, and certainly South Asia is pretty well known to me from my time in Singapore, not just work-wise, but I was actually sharing with the guys beforehand. A unknown fact or little known fact about me is I actually drove an auto rickshaw across India from Kochi in Kerala to Kathmandu. So there's random places off NH7 that I've broken down on and got a onion bhaji at 3 p.m. That another time when we all speak, maybe we can talk about those. But here I'm to talk about how to grow your community online. I know this is a mainly retail audience, and although typically you don't think of travel companies as retailers, at the end of the day, it's the same aspect. You have online sales funnel, you have a product you're looking for people to purchase, you have a checkout flow, and you've actually got a fulfillment around it. I think one of the things that we can talk about, some of the more technology areas, particularly in some of the Q&A. I think one of the ones that is really important in Airbnb's growth is how you can leverage that community, both online and offline, to be powerful advocates. And I believe it's been a big part of Airbnb's success and growth from the early days in 2008 up till now. From like my time at Airbnb, I was there for 4 years. In quite a pivotal point when I joined, there were around 300 people globally. And I was, I think, like the 10th person in the UK. By the time we left, we were over 100 in the UK, and it must have been like 5,000 globally. So large amounts had changed in that point. I think firstly, the community, in order to have a successful community who talk about your brand and excited about it, I think you need to know who you are and what you stand for first. And one of the things that's really interesting about Airbnb was that Airbnb, like many companies, I'm sure like many of yours, have core values or beliefs or mission statements, etc. I think one of the ones that's really interesting about Airbnb was that these core values were written down before the first employee was even hired. So the three founders, who are the three gentlemen you can see hugging each other at that point, when they're actually thinking about trying to bring on even their first employee, the first engineer, they wanted the closeness to the mission and the teamwork that they built as the three founders. So actually spent a lot of time codifying this, even when it was an early stage business, and normally you're trying to just get anything up and going in any kind of sales that happens. So I'll explain briefly like the core values, but I think the key point is, and I'll talk about how you make them come alive later, because many companies have stuff stuck on the wall, but it doesn't mean very much. But I think actually thinking about who you are and what you represent for your company and your employees is the first step to thinking about who you are and what you represent to your customers. So for Airbnb, a really important one is be a host. At the core of Airbnb's business is hosting people, whether it's in your home, in the original homes business, or an experience, and experiences thing, which was launched about 4 years ago. That idea of hospitality is really important, and that looking for people who embody that hospitality at work is an important area. Secondly is champion the mission. So be a big believer in this. You're not just working for a company because you think, it's a decent paycheck and might work out all right. I like the free food. That there's actually a real passion around what's happening. And what you can see is a lot of Airbnb employees were hosts themselves beforehand, and that was the same case for myself. So when I was living in Singapore, I spent a lot of time on the road. So my place wasn't being used very often. So I was actually an Airbnb host long before I was an Airbnb employee. The third one, this is kind of an in-joke for Airbnb, is be a serial entrepreneur. The reason why, and if people cast their minds back to a 2008 American election, you had John McCain representing the Republicans, and obviously a much more famous Barack Obama representing the Democrats. Airbnb ran out of money at that stage. So the two of the founders leveraged their design background to design these cereal boxes. They sold them for like $20 per box, made about 20 or 30 grand, then plowed that back into the business. And all they did in terms of the cereal was they just poured, basic, probably Cheerios or cornflakes from bulk store-bought packets into these nicely designed boxes and sold them on eBay. The reason why that's important is it's what do you need to do to make something work? So it's thinking creatively, but also like taking a bit of a risk to make something work. And then the fourth one is embrace the adventure. So a startup life is pretty unpredictable, as you guys all know. You need to be ready for those ups and downs. So let's talk about the actual values themselves, but probably more important is how to keep them alive and relevant. So even in terms of interviewing, all of the grades were based on core values, and there was a specific interview from someone who wasn't a domain expert for the role about core interviews. So if you were a software engineer, you would obviously have the interviews to work out whether you can code, but also you'd have a separate one as to how you would be a part of and be additive to the culture. Similarly, for employees who are in the business, performance reviews worked and graded against similar. And then lastly, as already mentioned, a high percentage of people who are actual hosts, so you experience the product yourselves. I think that's one which is a really relevant one for you guys. Like, whatever you're selling, how many of you and your employees are actual real customers of it, can really understand both the product itself, but what it means for your end customers. So I realize I've spoken a lot about actual internal stuff first, but when you start to put this to an external side, how do you speak to your community? And the examples I'm bringing out here is actually the people that know you and like you the best. You typically get I was about to say the best feedback. You get the most opinionated feedback from, and at least you can understand what you're looking for in that. So even on simple bits that regularly every month I'd meet either for dinner or coffees, groups of hosts in the markets that I worked on. So you stay close to the actual people, and you hear it most directly from people when you're meeting them in person, but also we did a large amount of work of trying to crowdsource in product improvements. So the bottom right, you can see Brian, the CEO, put out like a tweet of what could we build, and there was like hundreds of ideas. About 50 of them got shortlisted and got built within like a few days following this. And many of them were very tactical things to help our customers do things better rather than, a new product line. So I think how you can engage your existing community and actually test out new ideas, get their feedback, but really include them in part of the building of your company process, because you'll find that they will be your most effective marketers. I know there'll be a large amount of marketing professionals on this call, but someone who's bought a product is going to be a far more genuine marketer than someone who works for the company. So I think how you can engage them in both the direction of the company, but also like how the products fit is really important. And then lastly, I'll play this video. This is a Super Bowl ad which Airbnb did. It's really of like, how do you transform some of those brand values and help people to show that, and inclusiveness. It was a big part of Airbnb. Now, certainly not all of you are going to be doing big budget ads, but actually having your marketing be something more than just pushing the product can actually help, because you get that affinity with your existing community, but also find like-minded people who are also there. So then moving, I guess, more away from the culture core values, but actually how you can make some decisions and putting some of the community ideas at the core of your decision making. So this is an example of, so Airbnb was, as well as a great brand, it's also a very controversial brand. And when you're doing something which is new in a space which is quite old, or at least highly regulated, like housing and space, there's many cases where you've got governments who are unsure of what to think of Airbnb, and actually a lot of places where the existing laws meant that it was illegal for someone to share their place on Airbnb. So taking London as an example, prior to me joining, if by the letter of the law, if you had, let's say you had your brother come to stay with you and they gave you 500 rupees to pay for the dinner or something, or they actually bought you something, technically that would be illegal. I know it sounds a bit ludicrous because it's that but it was the way the law was written meant that was technically illegal. Naturally, before Airbnb, no one really cared, but once you've got something where you've got thousands and thousands of listings in London, it becomes a real challenge, and it prevents people from looking to host, and people want that security. So we were able to work with the government to get Airbnb legalized, but I think crucially with a limit, so that people could only host for up to 90 days in the year unless they were a bed and breakfast or a hotel, so they had that accreditation. The reason why I say this is important is that if we were trying to maximize money in the short term, we'd have pushed to have no limits. And secondly, that the people who'd helped us grow were ordinary people who were sharing their spare room or their place when they went on holiday, and that actually protecting and enshrining their rights was the most important thing versus trying to bring any professional category on. So I think we knew what we stood for, who our community was, and we were advocates for them to mean that they could do their work much better. And that was different to some of our competitors. And OTA is online travel aggregator. Apologies for bringing a very travel specific acronym in there. But initially, a lot of our competitors didn't do the same, and they had some short-term revenue growth. But I think the stickiness of our product with them was helpful by making some difficult decisions. And that's putting their decisions with, and the way in which we actually did some of this was we did a lot of canvassing of our community of what types of regulation would work and be acceptable. So we work quite collaboratively, both with the community as well as with the regulators. Then I'll pause to, I won't read this through. I think this is very much like from our CEO, Brian, to Airbnb hosting guests. And this sort of talks about why we weren't looking at short-term gains to illustrate the decision that was made earlier, that actually as a brand and a business, there's no reason it can't go on forever. And if you're trying to make it like, a T20 match, when you're trying to narrow it down to such a short period, you potentially make different decisions. If you play it more like a test match or a test match which never finishes, you actually work a bit longer and you push further. And as it says at the end, your focus is to be able to get to the mountaintop of what you're trying to achieve, not to get to that intermediate like way station. But it's not all long game. You got to run a business, you got to make things work. And so I think this is very much influenced by, there's a lot of influence from Amazon in Airbnb and the thought of like your output metrics, actual sales at the end of the day, or at least in our case, if we were saying, how can we get more hosts on Airbnb? We can try and measure how many hosts there are in London. At the end of the day, we know whether we hit or miss the target, but if you just measure the target, you don't really know what's happening. But going to those input metrics where you can see examples would be, obviously there's improved online conversion, but that there's really important community-based ones, like how we actually out with our customers to be able to talk to them to understand, but also how to set things up to mean that the regulations are all set. And I can imagine for many of you guys in terms of retail, if you'll think that the equivalent of regulations is, if you're looking to export, understanding some of those customs aspects, that understanding those could be a big barrier to actually getting those output metrics through. I think coming towards the end, another one is there's all the good stuff of building an online community, and we'll have a nice dinner, we'll talk about it, we'll try and build some things to help you. But when things go wrong, you need to be pretty open. So this is a case which was like the EJ case, where there was an Airbnb host who had their place entirely trashed, like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. And there was a point for Airbnb to pay out that amount would have bankrupted the company. So to try and work out how best to go, actually what this ended up producing is, I think, one of Airbnb's like best products for hosts, which is the host guarantee, where property damage up to $1 million is covered by Airbnb, no additional cost. So it's effectively free insurance. But I think what's really important is to have the credibility to be able to launch something like that, is to be able to say to people, and that we actually let you down by not having this protection before. So again, thinking about how you have an honest, transparent, but also the tone of voice which represents you as your brand. You do that both in the good stuff and the bad stuff, and you're able to have headlines in CNN saying, we've really screwed things up. I think being open to that is important. And I myself have had ones where we made some mistakes around tax collection for Irish hosts. And I stood in front of like 100 quite angry Irish hosts to be able to talk about how it was a mistake. And it was one of the least fun 2 hours of my career, but it was better to actually tell people straight and hear the challenges. And I think people, maybe not on the day, would respect it, but I think afterwards they were happy that we actually didn't try and hide behind anything. We openly told them first what was happening, what we'd done wrong, and what we were going to do about it. And so I think similar to that, there's not just how do you give good news, how do you give bad news, but actually where are the rewards? So Superhost is something that was given to Airbnb's most successful hosts. If you had high review scores, very good response rates, etc. And again, something you can think about for your bits of businesses is how can you either gamify or add stratas to your community. People inherently are quite competitive and like a bit of recognition. So if there's ways that you can create that through the usage of your product or purchasing beyond just it's easy to do the 10% discount type one, but what are the ways that you can actually give them better access to you and the team, better access to early products, that actually is something people really value and will work hard to do. That also what we did was to each meeting room in any Airbnb office you went to around the world was themed like a listing. So in the middle picture, you can see different styled ones go. So it's actually meaning that every time you walked into a meeting room, you're actually involved in and feeling like you're in someone's home. And then lastly, you've got very financial bits that for Airbnb's IPO, there was a tranche of the shares were held back for hosts, for super hosts, and they were able to effectively buy those, use those like options like any of the employees. So it's actually rewarding them like employees, even though they were part of the actual business. And then lastly, it's a little bit of a side tangent, but when you're looking to build your community, look at other people who've got great communities, even if they don't seem that obvious to you. So there's probably not that many similarities between Lego and Airbnb. Maybe you find lots of Lego in some Airbnb hosts' homes if you're staying with kids, but we were able to do something where Lego is opening a new museum in Denmark, and we were able to actually have a stay over in there before it opened for some of our run competition. So just thinking of, even as people that aren't the most obvious co-marketing candidates, who's someone who's got maybe similar values to yourself, or actually has a community that you really admire, and how could you try and work with them to do something a bit fun and set up. So that's all I've got. I'll stop sharing now, and then I'll hand back to you, Charu, and we can talk through some Q&A. You're on mute, Charu.
So sorry. Thank you, James. It was a wonderful presentation. Airbnb is surely a superb organization and so much learnings today for us. As you mentioned in the presentation, the community and the trust built on it is a focal point for Airbnb. But how did the competition react to it, and what are the efforts made to maintain and grow through leveraging this? Made it easier to carry out your marketing activities, or has it been a challenging journey?
You're right that the trust that comes with it is really important, but also when you're doing something new and you're kind of building a category, others are able to piggyback on that trust and also go through it. And obviously people like Expedia, Booking.com, slightly different, but like kind of Oyo in India, they've been able to utilize some of that credibility to grow their businesses. And I think firstly, there's a little bit of, actually, if you're in an emerging part of a business and that overall market is growing, other people are getting involved, it's more important to try and grow that than, you know, slit each other's throats over like really a race to the bottom in how you go through that. But I think more of, when you've got people who are coming into your area more lately, often they don't understand who they're trying to talk to as well. And so if I take a direct example of Booking.com, went very strongly into home rentals, they actually didn't provide very much in terms of the supports that I mentioned, like the host guarantee, the insurance policy. They didn't provide liability insurance for hosts. They didn't have like specialist actual sort of customer care lines for the hosts. They were put in the same bucket as a hotel. And so obviously if you're Hilton, it's very different than you or I with our spare room. So I think there's one of, you trust yourself that you know what your target audience probably wants better than some of the newer entrants. But then secondly, actually see it as a little bit of a benefit. Well, I guess maybe a congratulations that you're possibly on the right track, and that it's maybe able to grow the overall market for you.
So meanwhile, James, maybe we can answer a couple of the audience questions as well in between.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've opened it up. Yeah, so I'll start with what's at the top. So
Sure.
So how do you keep your host community connected? Do you have a platform where they can connect, and have you thought of a joining matchmaking platform to connect the community? So it's like, yeah, we talked about of the more offline groups. So we'd have host community clubs in major cities where we operated, which in fact, we actually had some in very small areas where you had an active group. So I would go to home sharing clubs in the southwest of the UK, into Ireland, where they actually came together and met regularly. I think that's one area where that's probably more the social end. I think another one that's really important is we had sort of separate to the Airbnb website host forum, which was curated and moderated. So we had country specific or city specific pages, and we actually had moderators to help answer questions that people would have, particularly when you think if you're a first time host, you'll have quite a lot of questions that we're able to both pair them with some more experienced hosts, but also help to answer ourselves. So that having a platform is also great to be able to do the online side, particularly if you're involved in a business where there's quite a bit of education needed, or it's not the easiest thing to be able to either use the product or engage with. If I move down, how do I ensure repeat customers? If I knew that, then I'd probably be retired entirely everywhere. I think really think about what your business is and what problems you're solving for someone. If you're able to solve that problem for them, then they're likely to come back to you. Or even if it's something which is a one-time purchase, they're likely to tell their friends about what that is. What are the best ways to manage negative opinions posted by trollers or an aggrieved customer? Excellent one. So I had many either personal, people could find me on LinkedIn or send emails to talk to me as the person running the business, as well as going through customer service. I think firstly, I guess to manage something, you need to understand it. So we'd always aim to find out what had actually happened. And again, this is more of the aggrieved customer, less of the troller. So if it was something on social media that was put on one of our marketing posts, then immediately we look to try and take it. So here's how you can contact us directly. We want to talk about it. Then at least you're taking that thing away from the main marketing discussion, but more importantly, you're actually trying to deal with it directly and understand what has happened. And in many cases where we made refunds or such like based on what was discussed there. And often if people felt heard, and we even had people that turn up to the office unannounced to talk through things, then they obviously didn't help them in that particular moment to mean they still had a challenge, but you could work through that and people came back. For trollers, it's a difficult one overall. If they really troll you on social media, again, it's just how to make it obvious to everyone else that they are trolling you and not very helpful. How to create long-lasting relation with client. Similar to what we had before, it's about value that you're bringing to them, and how are you helping them to run their business, run their life, enjoy what they're doing. I think that if you're able to talk in a kind of a real tone of voice in all your communications, then it's a bit like building a friendship. You're open, trustworthy, and you can work out how best to help those. All right, what are the best marketing strategies for a new co or startup? I'll leave aside the paid kind of stuff, or the most obvious paid things. Advertising on Instagram, TikTok, Google, your chosen digital platform of choice is both something that is, I guess, 101, but also, shout to our friends at Alavi, something that they would be very interested to talk to you about. I think for things which are not directly paid, or at least that you're getting a direct sale, I think referrals is a way to incentivize that word of mouth and track it is really important. So for hosting, actually people referring their friends or people that they knew to become hosts was really important, and especially when it's quite a complicated move like becoming a host on Airbnb, then having someone who's actually live there, they can answer more questions than someone else. So I think about what can you either do as a referral basis, give 100 rupees, get 100 rupees, or actually could you have almost power users become salespeople for you, that you incentivize them by X amount per sale to be able to bring on new business for you. What aspects of work for Airbnb and working from home and what's not worked for them? I think it was already a fairly remote-ish business, or at least hybrid business. So being out of the office wasn't the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge has actually been how to pivot to much greater online community discussions versus being able to do so much offline. So that's probably been the biggest challenge, was meant more investment in terms of platforms and open Q&As, much like this one, to go with hosts. But I think what it's lost is some of the some of obviously that interaction. Naturally, as a travel business, it's much harder to get people to do what you're aiming to bring people guests when there's less things there. Best technology for SME to enhance online performance. Potentially presume this is around marketing. I'll again defer to my good friends at Alavi. I'm sure they would love to be able to be in there. For the two I'll tackle next of community engagement without being heavily dependent on social media and common mistakes. I think for community engagement, you can actually build it up through, again, there's the offline aspect, but actually, if you count email as social media, I don't really. I think that actually a combination of blog and email is a good way to keep people up to date. If you think of the increasing rise of Substack and lots of things people subscribe to, if you've got compelling content, not necessarily around trying to sell your product, but around the space that you're in and you're a trusted commentator, then I believe that that's a good way to build up your profile and continue to engage your community, even when you're not trying to sell to them. Like travel is a sort of business where people are lucky if they get 1 or 2 holidays a year. So Airbnb isn't really relevant for many people the other 49 weeks of the year. So actually providing content of great places to be able to stay, dreaming about a holiday, actually fun things like that Lego house meant that we were able to keep in people's minds, even if we weren't able to, even if someone wasn't looking to be able to book something right there, that meant that when they were thinking about us more frequently. Common mistakes on working on the community engagement, assuming that your community is one single thing and they're just, that you could almost put them into one person. The community wants X or the community thinks Y. You'll have a variety of different personas that will use your services and product. So the understanding some of those different ones, and you can then help to tailor stuff. So if I take a couple of examples of host profiles on Airbnb, which are quite different. One host profile is is like a startup, either employee or owner, where you're hustling, you're looking to build up some additional money to help run your business. So using your asset of a spare room is important. That's one category of host, who's very different to what we call the empty nester, which is if your kids have left home, they've gone to university, they've moved out, they've got married, then probably as someone in your 50s, 60s, you may well have much more space than you did before. You could monetize that space. So those are two very, both equally valuable hosts, but how you speak to a 65-year-old versus how you speak to a 25-year-old who's setting up their own digital business, it's very different, but also what they want to hear from you is very different. So I'd say the common mistake is to simply assume your community is all the same. Does Airbnb see OYO as competition? Airbnb owns a stake in OYO, so there's mutual success in general, but I think sort of seriously, they're playing quite different spaces. I know OYO is bought as homes, but it's much more of a mid-range hotel provider, providing good quality experience, but without some of the probable hospitality. So I'd see they're probably, although you could choose to stay in either one, I don't think there necessarily is the particularly direct competition. And again, Airbnb has a stake in OYO, so there's some shared benefits either round. Does Airbnb use any AI technologies into their marketing efforts? Has it beneficial, effective, beneficial? So the AI has been more around, I think we have Charu back.
I have a few questions. I saw you were taking a few questions from the audience, but I also have a few questions which I wanted responses to.
Please,
so first of all, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So the first question is, there's a wealth of data being captured online. What technology or tools have helped the brand utilize the data effectively to grow online?
So there's, I think, particularly if I talk on the marketing side, Airbnb actually made like a few acquisitions or acqui-hires in the digital marketing space to be able to better manage the data that we had for potential sort of future hosts and guests. So this is probably a little bit of the cheat in that if you're successful enough, you can afford to not just buy the software, but actually like literally buy the company and the engineers that go in. I think of ones which were more sort of either off the shelf or other ones, then Charo is obviously having some challenges. Please, let's use the online Q&A, or actually if anyone just wants to shout out, I'll take any question from anyone. Unfortunately, the previous ones in the Q&A got lost. At least
yes, that's right, James.
Yeah,
I think
unfortunately.
we can catch on from the question you were answering about AI and technological tools that Airbnb uses.
Sure, yeah. So I think it was particularly around, like, I think one of, as I said, on the more marketing side, a lot of the actual was actually made by acquisitions and built in-house. I think on data science, there was quite a lot of the more machine learning end of AI in understanding actually like what would be the best like web flows around conversions in different areas. So we spent a lot of time on the more, I guess, quite a large data science team who would be building out those machine learning tools as to how to showcase the different listings on a platform. Should we have 9? Should we have 8? How do you work through the checkout? I'm afraid I don't have the actual names of those tools to hand, but they were particularly used on the data science side, which influenced the categorization of what was there in there. And if you think of, if you've got millions and millions of listings, then how to categorize them is quite difficult. You know, there's places with a pool, there's places with 2 bathrooms, there's places which have, you know, a shape like a dog kennel, believe it or not. That how to try and categorize all that was a big challenge. There's a large amount of AI used to be able to showcase those listings sensibly.
Sure, great. So our next question from the list is definitely, so in terms of growing your community online in other markets, what are some challenges that Airbnb came across when expanding? So do you think that there were certain markets that Airbnb couldn't move into or had to withdraw from certain places, and what can a business actually take away from those barriers?
I feel that the internationalization is a big area, and I think one of the big challenges is around regulation, as I mentioned before. So I worked on like quite a few different markets, and what you could do in Oslo was very different to what you could do in Stockholm, which is very different to what you could do in Edinburgh, and even within countries it was different. So I think that understanding the local regulations for any business is extremely important in terms of expanding, but also on the guest side, what the expectations are of different areas. So if I say for large markets, Airbnb was much more successful in UK and France than Germany, for example. On the surface, there's no real reason why it should be more or less successful there. But once you sort of dug into it, that actually a lot of the payment plans that we had for Germany were not so good. We'd go on about the German market hugely, but you had a much lower credit card penetration, much greater reliance on installment or deposit type plans. And we noticed that the conversion rate, we're able to increase the conversion rate quite significantly, you know, 20 or 30 percentage points of improvement by providing better local payments provision for Germany using Klarna and a few other ones than elsewhere. So I think when localizing, particularly in your guys' business around retail, then local payment methods, I'd say, is a very important one that's easy to get wrong. Last one I'll share is when you've got a really big market opportunity, being prepared to do things entirely differently. So Airbnb for China actually was run as a separate business unit. It had a different brand name. It sounded a bit like Airbnb, but it meant something Chinese, was spelt differently on the URL, and that there were separate user flow and like checkout for China versus elsewhere.
So, hi James again. So, I so I would like to know in terms of growing your community, which in other markets, what are the problems or challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges? There has been market that you had to withdraw, and you were unable to enter, and what kind of other barriers you must have faced?
So I was covering a sort of start point of that. I guess if I talk of one where we failed and actually like pulled out of, I said this is probably like not necessarily a country, but actually a market segment that we were aiming. One of the challenges that we saw was people wanting a greater security around knowing that their Airbnb would be perfectly fine. And in response, we looked to develop what we called Airbnb Plus, which is technically still around, but it was something where there was like someone went round to vet the property, it met certain amounts of criteria. What we learned through trying to do it was the amount of manpower that required and the difficulty in terms of how changeable our supply was, and that how to market it was quite a challenge that we actually ended up, it's still technically there, but we didn't really go ahead with it. We actually pivoted more to there being focused themes of homes like for families or for business travel. So rather than, we were trying to realize that we were trying to, I guess, provide a feature in the product of this plus tier, but actually what we should have been trying to do was what's great for business travel, what's great for family travel. And that was something that I think we learned through trying to raise everything.
Okay, that's nice. So managing your community is essential to brand and perhaps more important than ever in terms of crisis, right? So in today's digital age, consumers are on the lookout for brands that engage with the community in a very meaningful way. So what advice would you give to the small and medium-sized brands that are looking to grow their own community online?
Firstly, it sounds silly, but start. Even if you have your Twitter or the email list you have, actually just engage, like either ask questions, put out some content. Sometimes it may feel like no one's listening or what's there, but if you're telling your story or you're providing things which in your tone of voice that you think will resonate, then and you're trying to help people either how to use your business or the things around your business, then you can become, then it's a long road. It's not something you can say, all right, we'll do it for a month and we want to see the impact on next month's sales. You have to believe in it to do it, but simply just start, be yourself and actually try and help people, and you'll get a good amount of inbound in there. You'll find out what people actually want.
So one more thing, as you know, it's a post-pandemic era and remote working is on boom these days. People are working from home, so they are preferring to go to some places which are very quiet and quaint, and so there might be some network issues also. How are you finding a solution to that issue where the network wasn't available earlier, but is a good place for Airbnb and they have good options over there? So how are you, sorry, what is the solution that you're providing for this thing, and how are you catering to this area basically?
Yes, it's only the getting away from it all and not being close to people is even more popular in these times than it has been. I think there's firstly, rather than necessarily trying to, the first thing is not necessarily like trying to solve the problem, but showing where the problem exists. So on the listing page, there'll be, has Wi-Fi, I know this sounds almost trivial, but when you're buying something, you want to know what it can and can't do. And so you can choose to, if you know somewhere doesn't have Wi-Fi, that actually may be a selling point for some people, but at least people know where at the point of booking, they're not, I think the greatest disappointment comes when, reality and expectation don't match. So if you can help people that they have a real expectation, then that comes there. For the hosts themselves, I mean, everybody's not done things like, pay for routers and all this other stuff, but certainly we have had like host stores where we've been able to help get discounts for certain areas. So if you're wanted to go and upgrade certain pieces of equipment, this goes for not just connectivity, but beds, linen, all this other stuff, we would help, we sort of be able to provide some like bulk buy type discounts.
So James, next question is, according to you, which are the technologies that are going to shape the future of brands which are working on the lines of Airbnb maybe?
I feel that I actually think the creator side of things is really important, in that how you can have actually individual hosts and guests can both tell their story. But if you think of a host, if you'll come to stay with me here, then I've got the local coffee shop that's the best. There's three in a row. One's good, one's average, one never go there. There's the advice you'll have about how to get to museums or certain areas, how to use the tube. I actually think that being able to enable the hosts themselves as creators and using some of the tools that are coming out in that creator economy becomes really, really important. So if you think of Substack on the email side, actually there's a lot of small business type work that's on the accounting bits that it sounds not so sexy, but there's enabled these people to be the micro entrepreneurs that they actually are, and that they can grow their own brand online. And if they're more successful, more people will come to Airbnb. So I think that's one side of it. I think the one which is probably, it would be in something in December 2021 to not talk about crypto or NFTs is probably, I feel like there's I have to address it. I think it's probably more of the payment methods that I don't believe there's not, I'm not expecting a pay in Bitcoin or Ether anytime soon, but I could see that, given that there's large amounts of host remittances that move, Airbnb moves billions and billions of dollars across borders every year. I could see that there's routes that you can make those more in a decentralized manner, but certainly to my knowledge, there's no plans of that thus far.
So do you think crypto is going to be the next currency which people are going to, or the brands are going to accept it in a very happy way going ahead?
I think it's going to become it depends on which currency you're talking about. I think something like Bitcoin is going to be much more of a store of value. And, yes, I could go and pay in gold somewhere, but it may not be so easy. I think retailers may be sensible to accept it now if they believe that the price is going to go up. So there's almost, it could be a way to get something in if you believe that the market's going to grow. I think where you'll see much more of crypto only areas is in where it's things around tokens. So if you think of people who are tokenizing their music artists who are actually tokenizing their songs to mean that you and I could own part of the royalties to a song, I think those end up being enabled by crypto because of the blockchain and the shared knowledge, versus it being just a way for me to send you money or you to send me money.
Okay, so India being a developing country, the opportunity is enormous over there. So what suggestions do you have for the growing startups over here? How can they build up their brand, and how can they gain the confidence of the consumers, and how can they grow going ahead?
I feel that the benefit of a growing market, particularly if, and I'm going to guess that a lot of the retailers here are probably catering to a middle class type market. I'm sure there'll be outliers in both ends, but if you're in something where that market of people who are earning X rupees per year is going to grow, then you at least one of your business challenges is solved, is that in that your addressable market is going to get higher. I think the thing which to remember is that as the market grows, you'll get more different types of customers. You'll have to think about your segments a bit more, and that then in a big market or a growing market, it's easy to try and sort of do a bit of everything for everyone. One of the things that I remember vividly the Airbnb CEO saying to me around something we're trying to build was the best way to grow a big business is to find a niche, dominate the niche, move to the adjacent niche, versus trying to kind of go, all right, can I get 2% of everything? Can you be really compelling and get 70% of something which might be quite small, but then that gives you a jumping off point to something else?
Building on your niche is the core of any brand. Yeah. This is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay. So James, can you share some tips? How can businesses reward their consumers who have been loyal to them from a really long time?
I mean, I'll steer clear of the financial ones because that's obvious, but genuinely access and involvement is really important. So, I mean, honestly, I would say for any of your businesses, whoever your top 10 customers are, you should speak to them pretty regularly. And obviously for a B2B business, that's much more, account management, customer success. But even as a B2C business, I would actually encourage everyone to look at your analytics or your emails, like who's the person who spent the most or who's actually bought the most from me. Actually, if you don't already have a connection with them, just send them something directly going, hi, I'm the CEO or head of whatever at this company. I'd love to talk about how you found things. And actually, like, access for something, when people really engage with a product or a company, they actually enjoy talking about it. I don't think they'll see it as an imposition. You can actually get a load of really good advice there and help to understand more. So I'd say that's almost the simplest and like the lowest cost one is find like the people who love you the most, work out why that is.
Yeah. So James, as you know, these are very tough times, and the third wave in India, we are talking about the third wave might hit us anytime soon. So what can we do? What can the brands do to promote their business in these tough times, and make and help, which can help them sustain also?
Yeah, I think when it's tough times, it's probably one of recognizing that these are here, and especially if you're something which is a more in-person type experience or product, then I mean, just particularly on the company side, like just realizing where you may need to cut costs, where you need to be a bit more efficient. How can you weather a storm? For other businesses, it can be, again, like you just have to look at the usage of Zoom and maybe not their most recent share price, but at least the share price around a year ago, that is this actually an opportunity to be able to double down and go further. So I think it's one of, what does the pandemic and a third wave mean for you and your business? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? But then I think also there's thinking of your team and being cognizant of your team and your customers, that everyone's going through this, and how can you actually help, particularly if your set of products can help, then you're actually sort of leaning into the challenge, but being positive about it versus it being something that's a concern.
That's wonderful, James. You have told us how to start your business, how to build your business, how to retain your consumers, how to leverage the technology. I mean, the insights were like really helpful for all of us. And I would like to thank you for a wonderful session and sharing some valuable insights and advice with us. So
my pleasure.
Really thank you. So going ahead, we'll be organizing many such webinars, and one of such is happening on December 16th, which is from 4 p.m. onwards. We'll be discussing about is international foray the future of the D2C brands, beauty brands going ahead. So do catch us on 16th. Thank you for joining us.